we got J. Warner Wallace. He is going to be trying to prove that Jesus isn't copied from pagan gods, which I have to say I somewhat agree, at least with that general statement that Jesus isn't copied from pagan gods or anything like that. But these pagan god concepts were syncretized into Judaism, which they then used their own Jewish background in order to construct this idea. And that's the basic idea of mythicism there. And of course, there's several books out there that you can get that kind of lay it out in more detail and all of the supporting evidence that shows that this is what happened, or most likely is what happened. At least, I would hope that most historicists could agree to some extent, at least because of what we find in the Gospels and what's in Paul's work, like a good bit of what's in Paul's work. It's mostly pulled from the Jewish religion, as well as syncretized elements from other pagan religions in the area. So we'll get into that a little bit more as we continue through the video. J. Warner Wallace, or as I lovingly call him, the dipshit detective, has been on sort of a speaking tour, not only around YouTube, but also just at churches and stuff. And he's doing kind of a speaking tour for his Person of Interest book. And basically, I don't know if you guys have seen Paula G's video where he just kind of briefly goes over what the Person of Interest concept is and then shows how ridiculous it is, the premise is. But basically what J. Warner Wallace is saying is that if you lost all of the Christian writings, you could still build the gospel message or the gospel stories, the stories about Jesus, off of external writings about the religion. And that's basically what the book is about, which seems kind of pointless to me personally, because obviously with Christianity being one of the most important religions in history, you're going to be able to put together the entire story from sources that are not Christian, just because of its wide influence on history. It doesn't prove anything about Jesus's historicity, historical elements of Jesus's life, or really anything about Christianity other than it became popular. And that's it. So he is going to try to show us how Jesus is not a copycat savior. Specifically, that's what he's trying to show us here.
Here's the timeline of history leading to the 1st century, okay? Do you realize how many deities were worshipped before Jesus was worshipped? Guys, there's a ton of these. As a matter of fact, there are people who will say that Jesus didn't even really live. He's just a myth created from all of the other prior myths. They cobbled that story together because he seems kind of similar to these myths. Really?
Well, yeah, so I want to handle that first. Mythicists, or Jesus mythers as he labels us, we don't say that Jesus was cobbled together from pagan myths or pagan stories. There are certain elements of pagan religions that make their way and influence the Jewish religion in order for it to be transformed into Christianity. So there's that influence, but that influence has happened to the Jews, to the Jewish religion before it was really all that established as a religion. Because if you think about it, back in the Old Testament, you have a lot of the main stories are based off of previous pagan myths, like the global flood story. That's based off of a previous pagan myth. The story of Moses, that's based off of Sargon of Akkad. His birth narrative, at least, is based off of Sargon of Akkad. So you have the Jews using pagan religions in order to inform their own religion all throughout the Jewish history. So it's not really that big of a surprise that pagan religions continued to influence the Jewish people, and the Jewish people reconfigured their ideas about their God based off of what was popular at the time. And seeing what was popular at that time in this region can enlighten us about why Judaism changed to incorporate several elements that seem to be foreign to Judaism prior to this syncretization. And so it's not just a simple matter of copying from one figure or another figure, or taking all of the figures, boiling it down, and then creating Jesus or something like that. It's a much more complicated process.
Now, here's the list of all 15 attributes. You ready? There they are. By the way, can you tell how clever I was? That's right, they all start with the letter I. I know. It's not easy to do. I had to use words I had never even heard of before.
Let's see, as you can tell right here, he's got a number of different attributes that he says describes all of these pagan gods. But the problem is that yet again, for however many times this week I've had to say it, he is putting the cart before the horse. So the cart is Jesus and the horse would be these other pagan religions. What J. Warner Wallace has done in his book, and what he's pushing here, is that he's went to Jesus and he's listed out 15 properties of Jesus that he can peg with an I, right? And then he's been able to match up some of these properties to these other pagan gods. As he'll explain here in a second, the reason why Jesus is so special is that he meets all 15 properties, whereas the other pagan gods don't. Now, here's the thing. This is quite similar to something that at least mythicists use, and that's called the Rank-Raglan hero type scale. So I wanted to do this because his list of 15 attributes, they don't make a whole hell of a lot of sense as far as being useful in describing pagan deities, other than he can use that list in order to argue for his particular deity, because all 15 apply to Jesus, but all 15 are not going to describe these pagan hero types. And, you've got several different heroes that you could apply this particular 22-point list to. The whole idea is about this list to classify somebody as this mytho-hero type is that you've got to score pretty high on the list in order to be categorized as that. Real historical people are generally lower, as far as points go, for how many in this list that they satisfy. So that's kind of what he's using here. But as you'll see, J. Warner Wallace has a very different list than what actual academics would use. So this is the first point. Mother is a royal virgin. Father is a king. Father often a near relative to mother. Unusual conception. Hero reputed to be the son of God. Attempt to kill hero as an infant, often by father or maternal grandfather. Hero spirited away as a child, reared by foster parents in a far country, no details of childhood, returns or goes to a future kingdom, is victor over a king, giant, dragon, or wild beast, marries a princess, often a daughter of a predecessor, becomes a king. For a time, he reigns uneventfully. He prescribes laws, later loses favor with gods or his subjects, driven from throne or city, meets with a mysterious death, often at the top of a hill. His children, if any, do not succeed him. His body is not burned and has one or more holy sepulchres or tombs. And so there's a number of people that score pretty high on this. It doesn't list them out right here, but this is the kind of list that he's talking about here. And for a lot of the mythical hero types from classical stories, they score really high on this. But you know who also scores really high on this list? Jesus Christ. And he satisfies way more than 15, but the difference is that Jesus, when put in the correct context and the correct class, seems to resemble these other pagan gods a lot more closely than what J. Warner Wallace is going to be telling us here.